The rain fell in sheets against the windows of the small apartment on the edge of the capital city. Velkash sat in his chair, staring at the wall where his military medals hung in a dusty case. 30 years had passed since the war ended, but for him it had never truly stopped. Every night brought the same nightmares. Every day brought the same hollow feeling in his chest. His communicator buzzed on the table beside him. He ignored it. The device had been buzzing all morning, but Velkash had no interest in speaking to anyone. People from his past life, his military days, occasionally tried to reach out. He never answered. What would he say to them? That he could not sleep without seeing human faces? That he jumped at loud sounds? That the smell of smoke made him sick? The buzzing stopped, then started again immediately. Velkash closed his eyes and sighed. Whoever it was, they were not going to give up. He picked up the device and saw the name on the screen. Dr. Lin Shah, his therapist. The only person he still spoke to with any regularity. Yes, Velkash said, his voice rough from disuse. Commander, I'm glad you answered, Dr. Lin Shah said. Her voice was calm and steady as always. I wanted to speak with you about something important. I already had my appointment this week. This is not about an appointment. Have you checked your messages today? Velkash looked at his communicator. 43 unread messages. He had not opened any of them in days. No. The Galactic Council is holding a memorial ceremony, Dr. Lin Shah said. For all species who fought in the human contact war, they have sent you a formal invitation. You are one of the few surviving commanders who faced human forces directly. The words hit Velkash like a physical blow. His hand tightened around the communicator. I will not go. Commander, I think you should consider it. I said no. His voice came out sharper than he intended. There was a pause on the other end. Velkash, you have been living in isolation for 3 decades. You have not spoken to any of your former crew members. You barely leave your apartment. The ceremony could help you. Help me? Velkash stood up, his body tense. How would standing in a room full of people who do not understand help me? They are veterans too. They do understand. They do not understand humans, and the words came out as almost a growl. None of them do. None of them saw what I saw. Dr. Lin Shah was quiet for a moment. Then perhaps you should tell them. The ceremony includes testimonies. You could share your experience. Why would I do that? Because carrying it alone is destroying you. Velkash looked at his reflection in the dark window. He barely recognized himself anymore. The proud commander he had once been was gone, replaced by this hollow shell. I will think about it, he finally said. That is all I ask. After the call ended, Velkash sat back down in his chair. He did not want to think about the ceremony. He did not want to think about the war. But once the memories started, they never stopped. He was back on the bridge of his command ship, the pride of the Talveen fleet. They were approaching Rigel Station, a human outpost that intelligence said was lightly defended. The mission was simple. Destroy the station, eliminate the human presence, and move on. Humans were a threat to the galaxy. That was what his superiors had told him. They were violent, unpredictable, dangerous. They had to be stopped before they spread. Velkash had believed every word. His fleet had outnumbered the human defenders 5-1. They had better ships, better weapons, better training. The battle should have been over in minutes. Any rational species would have seen the odds and surrendered. Humans were not rational. The first human ship that exploded had surprised him, not because it was destroyed, but because of how it was destroyed. The ship had turned directly into his fleet's formation and detonated its reactor core. The explosion took out 3 Talveen vessels. 3 ships gone in an instant because 1 human crew had chosen to die. They are insane, his second officer had said, staring at the tactical display in shock. Velkash had said nothing. He had ordered the attack to continue. The humans fought like nothing he had ever seen before. They did not retreat when they should have. They did not surrender when defeat was certain. They fought until their ships were torn apart, and then they kept fighting in smaller craft. When their smaller craft were destroyed, they fought in pressure suits with handheld weapons. When those ran out of ammunition, they used whatever they could find. 1 human soldier managed to board Velkash's command ship through a damaged airlock. The alarms had blared as security teams rushed to intercept the intruder. Velkash had watched through the security cameras as the human moved through the corridors. He was wounded badly. Burns covered half his body. His armor was cracked and leaking air. He should have been dead, but he kept moving. The security team cornered him near the engineering section. The human raised his hands as if to surrender. The security chief had approached, weapon lowered slightly. That was when Velkash realized what was about to happen. "Get back!" he had shouted into the communicator. "Everyone get back now." The human soldier's name, he would later learn, was Tai Yang. He was 23 years old. He had a family waiting for him on Earth. None of that had mattered when he triggered the explosive device attached to his chest. The blast tore through the engineering deck and reached the command bridge. Velkash remembered being thrown across the room. He remembered the sound of metal tearing and people screaming. He remembered the emergency lights flickering on, and the cold rush of air as the hull breach began venting atmosphere. Half his crew died in that explosion. The command ship survived, but barely. The battle ended shortly after, with the human station destroyed and the surviving humans either dead or captured. Velkash had been hailed as a hero. He had led a successful mission against the dangerous humans. He had been promoted, given medals, praised for his courage. He had felt nothing but horror. In the apartment, Velkash stood and walked to the bathroom. He splashed cold water on his face and looked at himself in the mirror. The scars from that day were still visible along his neck and shoulder, but the scars on the outside were nothing compared to the ones inside. He picked up his communicator again and opened the invitation from the Galactic Council. The ceremony was in 1 week. There would be veterans from dozens of species. There would be speeches, awards, remembrances, and there would be testimonies. Velkash thought about Dr. Linshaw's words. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps carrying this alone was destroying him. He had spent 30 years trying to forget, trying to move on, trying to understand why humans fought the way they did. Nothing had worked. Maybe it was time to stop trying to forget. Maybe it was time to speak. He sent his reply to the council before he could change his mind. He would attend the ceremony. He would give his testimony. And perhaps for the first time in 30 years, someone would finally understand why the memories of human violence had shattered him so completely. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside something in Velkash had shifted. He did not know if it would help. He did not know if anything could help anymore. But at least he would try. 1 week until the ceremony. 1 week to prepare to face his past. 1 week until he would stand before the galaxy and tell them the truth about what humans were really like in war. He just hoped he would survive the telling. The Galactic Memorial Hall was larger than Velkash had imagined. The ceiling stretched high above, covered in holographic displays showing stars and nebulas. Rows of seats filled the vast space and nearly everyone was occupied. Veterans from dozens of species sat together, some in uniform, others in civilian clothes. The air hummed with quiet conversation and the occasional flash of translation devices. Velkash stood near the back, his hands clasped behind him. He wore his old uniform. It fit poorly now. He had lost weight over the years and the fabric hung loose on his frame. But Dr. Linshaw had suggested he wear it, something about closure and acknowledgement. A krill warrior approached him, moving on 6 powerful legs. The creature's exoskeleton gleamed under the lights. "Commander Velkash?" the krill asked, its voice translated through a small device on its chest. "Yes. I am Battle Leader Krentok. I fought in the Outer Rim campaigns. I have read your service record. It is an honor to meet you." Velkash nodded but said nothing. What could he say? That the honor felt like a weight crushing his chest? That every mention of his service record made him want to disappear? Krentok seemed to sense his discomfort. "The ceremony will begin soon. They will call veterans to share their testimonies. I hope you will speak. Your experiences are important." "Perhaps," Velkash said. The krill warrior moved away and Velkash was alone again. He looked around the hall at all the different species gathered here. Each one had their own story, their own trauma, their own memories. But how many of them had faced humans in combat? How many of them truly understood? A tone sounded through the hall and everyone began moving toward their seats. Velkash found his assigned place near the front. The seat next to him was empty, marked with a small plaque that read "Reserved for the Fallen." Every row had such a seat. A reminder of those who could not be here. The ceremony began with speeches from council members. They spoke about sacrifice and duty, about the cost of war and the importance of peace. The words washed over Velkash without really registering. He had heard similar speeches before. They all said the same things. Then came the testimonies. The first veteran to speak was a Nexali pilot. The small, winged creature approached the central platform and began describing a battle near the Kepler belt. The story was tactical and precise. Ship movements, weapon ranges, casualties counted in numbers rather than names. The audience listened politely and applauded when the pilot finished. More veterans followed. Each one shared a memory, but they all felt distant and clinical. Even when they spoke of loss, the words felt rehearsed and safe. No one was really saying anything. ViolenceHFY felt his frustration growing. Was this what the ceremony was? A chance to share sanitized versions of their experiences? To pretend that war was something that could be neatly packaged and presented? A female Talveen officer spoke next. She had lost her entire squadron in a battle with human forces. She described the tactical errors, the communication failures, the chain of command breaking down, but she said nothing about fear, nothing about the nightmares, nothing about what it felt like to watch everyone she cared about die. When she finished and returned to her seat, the moderator called for the next speaker. ViolenceHFY found himself standing before he fully realized what he was doing. His legs carried him toward the platform as if moving on their own. He reached the center and looked out at the assembled crowd. Hundreds of faces looked back at him. Hundreds of veterans who had survived the war. Hundreds of people who thought they understood. "My name is Commander ViolenceHFY," he began. His voice sounded strange in the huge space, amplified and echoed back at him. "I led the fleet action at Rigel Station. It was one of my first major engagements against human forces." He paused, trying to organize his thoughts. He had not prepared anything to say. He had not really intended to speak at all. "We outnumbered them 5-1, he continued. "We had better technology, better training. The victory should have been certain. But humans do not care about certainty. They do not care about odds. They care about something else entirely, and I still do not understand what it is." The audience was quiet now, listening with more attention than they had given the previous speakers. "I watched a human ship fly directly into our formation and detonate itself. I watched human soldiers fight with weapons that should have been empty. I watched a young man, wounded so badly he could barely stand, walk into my command ship and kill half my crew with an explosion. His name was Tai Yang. He was 23 years old." ViolenceHFY's voice caught slightly on the name. He cleared his throat and continued. "But that is not what haunts me most. What haunts me is something that happened later, during the final assault on the station. We had breached the medical bay. There were wounded humans inside, along with some of our own soldiers who had been captured and were receiving treatment." He could see it again in his mind. The white walls of the medical bay, the rows of beds, the smell of disinfectants mixed with blood. There was a human medical officer there. Her name was Sojin. She was exhausted. Her uniform was covered in blood, both human and Talveen. She had been treating everyone, regardless of species. When my soldiers moved to execute the wounded humans, she stepped between them. ViolenceHFY looked down at his hands. They were shaking slightly. She was unarmed. She had no chance of stopping us. But she stood there and said, "You will have to kill me first." Not as a threat. Not as a challenge. Just as a statement of fact. She would die before she let us harm her patients. The hall was completely silent now. My soldiers hesitated. They did not understand why she would do this. Neither did I. It made no tactical sense. She could have stepped aside and lived. Instead, she chose to die protecting people who were already defeated. ViolenceHFY raised his head and looked at the audience again. In that moment of confusion, human reinforcements arrived. The fighting resumed. Sojin was killed in the crossfire. She died covering the evacuation of her patients, both human and Talveen. I have spent 30 years trying to understand why she did not just step aside. He stopped speaking for a moment, letting the weight of the words settle. Everyone talks about human violence, about how fierce they are in combat, about how they do not know when to surrender. But no one talks about why. Why would a species fight like that? Why would they choose death over the logical choice of survival? His voice grew stronger, more urgent. I was trained to believe humans were monsters, violent savages who threatened the galaxy. But Sojin was not a monster. Taeyang was not a monster. They were people who loved something so much they were willing to die for it. And we called that insanity. We called that violence. ViolenceHFY's hands gripped the edges of the podium. I am not here to glorify war. I am not here to say the humans were right or that we were wrong. I am here to say that I do not understand them. 30 years later, I still wake up seeing Sojin's face as she stood between my soldiers and her patients. I still hear the explosion that killed Tae Yang. I still feel the terror of facing an enemy who would rather die than give up. He looked around the hall, making eye contact with as many veterans as he could. You want to know what shattered me? It was not the violence. It was the love behind it. The absolute, unshakable love that made that violence possible. Humans love so fiercely that they will burn themselves to ashes if it means protecting what they care about. And I have no idea how to process that. Velkash stepped back from the podium. He had said everything he needed to say, more than he had intended to say. His body felt hollow, as if speaking the words had drained something essential from him. The silence in the hall stretched for several long seconds. Then slowly one person began to clap, then another. Then the entire hall erupted in applause, but Velkash barely heard it. He returned to his seat and sat down heavily. The moderator called for a break, and veterans began standing and moving around. Several approached Velkash, wanting to speak with him. The Krill warrior, Krentok, was among them. Commander, Krentok said, I too faced humans in combat. I watched them sing as they charged against impossible odds. At the time I thought they were mad. But you are right. It was not madness. It was something else. Other veterans shared their own stories. A Nexali pilot described how human ships would ram their vessels when they ran out of ammunition. A Talvine ground commander talked about humans who fought with broken weapons and bare hands. Each story was different, but the theme was the same. Humans fought with a desperation and ferocity that no other species could comprehend. As Velkash listened, he realized something. He was not alone in his confusion. He was not the only one haunted by memories of human violence. Perhaps that was why the ceremony existed. Not to celebrate war, but to help those who survived it, find others who understood. It was a small comfort, but it was something. For the first time in 30 years, Velkash felt slightly less alone. 3 days after the ceremony, Velkash received a message from someone he did not recognize. The name on the sender information was Jiwoo, and it said she was a human documentary filmmaker. He stared at the message for several minutes before opening it. The text was simple and direct. Jiwoo had attended the ceremony and heard his testimony. She was working on a project about the war from multiple perspectives. Her grandfather had fought in the same battles as Velkash. She wanted to interview him. Velkash deleted the message immediately. Then he sat in his chair and stared at the wall. A human wanted to talk to him. A human whose grandfather had fought against him. The idea made his skin crawl. What would she want? Revenge, confrontation? To tell him what a monster he had been? The next day, another message arrived. Jiwoo again. This time she explained more about her project. She was not interested in blame or anger. She wanted to understand both sides of the conflict. She wanted to show that everyone involved had been shaped by fear and misunderstanding. Velkash deleted this message too. On the third day, Dr. Linshaw called him. Have you been receiving messages from a human filmmaker? She asked. Yes. How do you know about that? She contacted me as well. She wanted to know if I thought speaking with her might help you. It would not help, Velkash said firmly. Are you certain? You took a big step by speaking at the ceremony. Perhaps taking another step is what you need. I cannot face a human, not after everything. Velkash, you faced hundreds of humans in combat. You can certainly face one human in a peaceful conversation. That was different. How? He struggled to find the words. In combat, I knew what to expect. I knew they would try to kill me and I would try to kill them. But a conversation? What would I even say? You could start with the truth. The same truth you told at the ceremony. After the call ended, Velkash found himself thinking about Jiwoo's messages. He had deleted them, but he still remembered the words. She had lost family in the war too. She understood pain. Maybe that was why she wanted to talk. He opened his communicator and typed a response before he could change his mind. He would meet with her once, just once. If it was too difficult, he would leave. They agreed to meet at a quiet cafe in the diplomatic quarter of the city. Velkash arrived early and chose a table in the corner, away from the windows. His heart pounded as he waited. What did humans look like in person? He had only seen them through tactical displays and brief glimpses in combat. He had never actually sat across from one. Jiwoo arrived exactly on time. She was smaller than he expected, with dark hair pulled back in a simple style. She wore casual clothing and carried a bag over one shoulder. When she saw him, she smiled and walked over. "Commander Velkash, thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Her voice was soft and friendly, nothing like the shouting battle cries he remembered from the war. Velkash stood awkwardly and gestured to the seat across from him. "Please sit." Jiwoo placed her bag on the floor and sat down. She ordered a drink from the automated server and then looked at him with genuine curiosity. "I was very moved by your testimony at the ceremony. It must have been difficult to share those memories." "It was," Velkash admitted. His voice was stiff, formal. He did not know how to be casual with a human. "My grandfather was at Rigel Station," Jiwoo said. "He was part of the defensive forces. When I told him I was trying to contact you, he asked me to bring you something." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small data device. "This is my grandfather's war journal. He recorded his experiences during the battle. I thought you might want to hear his perspective." Velkash stared at the device as if it might explode. "Why would he want me to hear it?" "Because he thinks you deserve to understand. He said you are probably carrying a lot of guilt, and maybe knowing the other side will help." Velkash took the device with shaking hands. Jiwoo activated it, and a holographic display appeared above the table. An old human man's face materialized, weathered and scarred. His name appeared beneath the image, Hyunwoo, former lieutenant in the Earth Defense Forces. The recording began to play. Hyunwoo's voice was rough but clear. "Day 12 of the siege. We are running out of everything. Ammunition, medical supplies, food, hope. The Talveen fleet has us completely surrounded. We have lost half our ships and most of our defensive platforms. Command says no reinforcements are coming. We are on our own." Velkash listened, transfixed. He had never heard a human speak about the battle from their perspective before. "We know we cannot win. Everyone knows it. But surrender is not an option. The Talveen do not take prisoners. They made that clear when they destroyed the colony ships at first contact. If we give up, we die. If we fight, we die. At least if we fight, maybe we slow them down enough for others to escape." The recording shifted to a different day. Hyunwoo looked more tired, more worn down. Tae Yang volunteered for the boarding mission. He knew it was suicide. We all did. But he said someone had to try, and he did not want anyone with children to do it. He was so young. Just a kid, really. He told me to tell his parents he loved them. Then he smiled and said, "See you on the other side, Lieutenant." Velkash felt something twist in his chest. He remembered Tae Yang. But in his memories, the young soldier had been a faceless enemy, not a person with parents and friends, not someone who smiled. The recording continued through several more entries. Hyunwoo described the fear, the exhaustion, the constant awareness that death was coming. But he also described the determination, the refusal to give up, not because they were brave, but because they had no other choice. "We fought like that because we had no choice," Hyunwoo said in one entry. "The Talveen taught us that mercy was not an option. They showed us that surrender meant extinction. So we learned to fight like cornered animals, not because we wanted to, but because we had to." The recording ended. Velkash sat in silence, staring at the empty space where the hologram had been. Everything he had believed about that battle about humans was shifting in his mind, you see, Jiwoo said quietly. "You thought humans were monsters, but my grandfather and his friends were just terrified people trying to survive. I did not know," Velkash whispered. "We were told humans were a threat, that they were violent by nature, that they would spread across the galaxy destroying everything." "Who told you that?" "Our commanders, our government, everyone." Jiwoo leaned forward. "And who told them? Where did that idea come from?" Velkash had no answer. He had never questioned it. It had simply been accepted as truth. "Commander, I do not blame you for what happened," Jiwoo said. "You were following orders just like my grandfather. But someone gave those orders. Someone started this war, and I think both our peoples deserve to know why." Over the next hour, Jiwoo explained her documentary project. She had interviewed dozens of veterans from both sides. She had collected records, testimonies, and personal accounts. What she had found was a pattern of misunderstanding and fear that had escalated into violence. "The more I research," she said, "the more I think this whole war was based on lies. Both sides were told the other was a threat. Both sides believed they were fighting for survival. But what if neither side needed to fight at all?" The words resonated with something deep inside Velkash. He had spent 30 years trying to understand why humans fought the way they did. but he had never questioned why the war started in the first place. "Would you like to meet my grandfather?" Jiwoo asked. "He specifically asked to speak with you." Velkash wanted to say no. The idea of facing Hyunwoo terrified him. But he found himself nodding. "Yes, I would like that." They arranged to meet at Hyunwoo's home the following week. When Velkash arrived, Jiwoo greeted him at the door and led him to a small garden in the back. Hyunwoo sat in a chair, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm weather. He was old and frail, but his eyes were sharp and clear. "Commander Velkash," Hyunwoo said. "Please sit." Velkash sat in the chair across from him. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Two old soldiers who had tried to kill each other decades ago, now sitting peacefully in a garden. "I heard your testimony," Hyunwoo said finally. "The story about Sojin. She was a good person. She saved my life once early in the war." "I am sorry," Velkash said. The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had. "I am sorry too," Hyunwoo replied. "Sorry for what we had to become to survive you. Sorry for the violence. Sorry for Taeyang and all the others who died thinking they were protecting Earth. I am sorry we made you become that," Velkash said. "I thought you were monsters. But you were just people trying to protect your families." Hyunwoo nodded slowly. "That is what war does. It turns people into monsters, and then makes them believe the other side is worse. But we were all just people, Commander. Scared people making terrible choices. They talked for hours." Hyunwoo shared stories from the war, and Velkash did the same. They found common ground in their nightmares, their regrets, their inability to move on. And slowly Velkash began to feel something he had not felt in 30 years. Understanding. Not forgiveness, not yet. But understanding. And perhaps that was enough to start healing. The meeting with Hyunwoo changed something fundamental in Velkash. For the first time since the war ended, he felt a purpose beyond simply surviving each day. If the war had been based on lies and misunderstandings, someone needed to uncover the truth. Someone needed to find out how it all started. He began his investigation quietly. As a decorated veteran, he still had access to certain military archives. Most of the detailed records from the war were classified, but his credentials allowed him to view summaries and operational reports. He started with his own missions, reading through after-action reports and strategic assessments. The official records painted a clear picture. Humans had been identified as a potential threat. First contact protocols had been bypassed due to the urgent nature of the danger. The initial strike on human colony ships had been a necessary preemptive action. Everything that followed was described as defensive operations against human aggression. But now, with Hyunwoo's testimony fresh in his mind, Velkash saw the gaps in the narrative. The reports never explained exactly how humans had been identified as threats. They never detailed what intelligence had led to the decision to attack civilian vessels. The whole chain of events was presented as inevitable, as if the war had been destined to happen. Velkash dug deeper. He requested access to strategic planning documents from before the war. He reviewed intelligence assessments and threat analyses. And slowly, a pattern began to emerge that made his blood run cold. The threat assessment that had condemned humanity was not based on actual contact or diplomatic communication. It was generated by an automated system that analyzed available data about human civilization. The system had flagged humans as dangerous because of their history of internal conflicts, their rapid technological development, and their territorial expansion. Velkash read the report 3 times, unable to believe what he was seeing. The entire war had started because a computer program had decided humans were too violent, based on historical records that did not even include any interaction with other species. He searched for the diplomatic records from first contact. There had to be some attempt at communication before the attack. But there was nothing. No diplomatic overtures, no warning messages, no attempt to verify the automated assessment. Instead, he found a name: Admiral Kothran, the officer who had commanded the first strike fleet. Velkash remembered him vaguely from military briefings. Kothran had been ambitious, eager for glory and advancement. He had taken the automated threat assessment and acted on it immediately, claiming that delay would give humans time to prepare. The colony ships that were destroyed in the first strike had been civilian vessels, families, scientists, engineers, people seeking new worlds to settle, not soldiers preparing for war. But the Admiral had ordered them destroyed based on a computer program and personal ambition. Everything that followed, all the violence and death, had started from that single decision. Velkash felt sick. He stood from his desk and walked to the bathroom, splashing cold water on his face. Taeyang had died because of a computer error and an ambitious officer. Sojin had died defending patients because someone had not bothered to verify an automated assessment. Thousands of humans in Talveen had killed each other because no one had questioned the initial premise. He returned to his research with a desperate need to find more. If this was true, if the war had been started based on false information, then the public deserved to know. The families of the dead deserved to know. Over the next weeks, Velkash compiled everything he could find. He traced the development of the threat assessment system and found that it had multiple documented flaws. Other species had been flagged as potential threats and then cleared after actual diplomatic contact. But humans had never been given that chance. He found records of junior officers questioning the decision to attack before attempting communication. Those officers had been reprimanded and reassigned. He found evidence that the military high command had known the threat assessment was preliminary and incomplete, but had chosen to act anyway. The more he uncovered, the more furious he became. Not just at the leadership who had made these decisions, but at himself. He had believed everything they told him. He had never questioned. He had followed orders and killed people based on lies. Velkash contacted Jiwoo and shared what he had found. She arrived at his apartment with recording equipment and spent an entire day reviewing the documents. Her expression grew darker as she read. "This is worse than I imagined," she said finally. "They knew. The Talaveen leadership knew the assessment was flawed and they attacked anyway." "Admiral Kothran wanted glory," Velkash said bitterly. "He wanted to be remembered as the leader who stopped the human threat. Instead, he started a war that killed millions. We need to make this public," Jiwoo said. "If we do, I will likely be charged with treason. These are classified documents. Are you willing to take that risk?" Velkash looked at the files spread across his desk. He thought about Taeyang, about Sojin, about all the soldiers on both sides who had died believing they were protecting something. They deserved better than to have their deaths based on lies. "Yes," he said, "I am willing." Jiwoo included the classified documents in her documentary. She interviewed Velkash on camera, asking him to explain what he had found and why he was coming forward. She spoke with Hyunwoo, who confirmed that humans had tried to send diplomatic messages before the war began. But those messages had been ignored or intercepted. The documentary was released on the Galactic Information Network. Within hours it went viral across dozens of worlds. Humans watched it and felt vindicated. Talveen citizens watched it and felt betrayed. Other species watched it and began questioning their own governments. 3 days after the release, security forces arrived at Velkash's apartment. They arrested him on charges of treason, espionage, and releasing classified information. He did not resist. He had known this was coming. They took him to a military detention facility. The cell was small and cold, with a single window that looked out onto a gray courtyard. Velkash sat on the narrow bed and waited. He had done what needed to be done. Whatever happened next, at least the truth was out. Jiwoo visited him through a communication screen. "I am sorry," she said. "I did not want this to happen to you." "It was my choice," Velkash replied. "Do not apologize for telling the truth. My grandfather is organizing something. He is reaching out to other veterans, both human and Talveen. They want to help you. There is nothing they can do. I broke the law. Maybe, but the law was protecting lies. That has to mean something." Over the following weeks, something remarkable began to happen. Veterans from the ceremony started speaking out in support of Velkash. Krentok, the Krill warrior, gave an interview saying that truth was more important than military secrets. Other Talveen officers, some still active in the military, began questioning the official narrative of the war. Hyunwoo appeared on news programs, frail but determined. He spoke about meeting Velkash, about how the commander had risked everything to expose the truth. He called Velkash a hero, not a traitor. Human veterans organized protests outside Talveen embassies. They demanded Velkash's release and a full investigation into how the war had started. The protests were peaceful but persistent, growing larger each day. The Galactic Council called an emergency session to address the situation. Jiwoo's documentary had created a diplomatic crisis. Multiple species were now demanding transparency about first contact protocols and threat assessment systems. If the Talveen Empire had started a war based on faulty intelligence, what was to stop it from happening again? Inside his cell, Velkash heard about all of this through brief updates from his attorney. He was surprised by the response. He had expected to be forgotten, to become a cautionary tale about soldiers who betrayed their oaths. Instead, he had become a symbol of something larger, but none of it felt real to him. He still saw Tae Yang's face in his dreams. He still heard the explosion that had killed his crew. The truth being revealed did not erase what had happened. It did not bring back the dead. One morning, his attorney arrived with unexpected news. The Galactic Council had agreed to hold a formal trial. Not a military tribunal, but a full civilian trial with representatives from multiple species serving as judges. The charges would be the same, but Velkash would have the opportunity to present his evidence publicly. Is that better? Velkash asked. It means the truth will be part of the official record, his attorney said. Whatever the verdict, the galaxy will know what you found. The trial was set to begin in 3 months. Velkash would remain in detention until then. But for the first time since his arrest, he felt a small spark of hope. Not hope for himself necessarily, but hope that something good might come from all this pain. Yunwoo sent him a message through the communication system. The old soldier's words were simple but powerful. You have more courage than any warrior I ever fought beside or against. Truth is the hardest battle, and you chose to fight it. Whatever happens, know that my people see you as a friend. You gave us something we have needed for 30 years. Validation. Our pain was real. Our fear was justified. And now everyone knows it. Thank you, Commander. Velkash read the message several times. The trial became the most watched event in galactic history. Every species with access to communication networks followed the proceedings. The courtroom was enormous, designed to accommodate representatives from dozens of worlds. Velkash sat at the defendant's table flanked by his attorneys, facing a panel of judges from 7 different species. The prosecution presented their case first. They argued that Velkash had violated his oath of service, stolen classified documents, and endangered Talveen security by releasing sensitive military information. The charges were serious and the recommended sentence was life imprisonment, but the prosecution's case felt hollow. Everyone watching knew this was not really about classified documents. It was about whether truth mattered more than loyalty to a system that had built itself on lies. When the defense began their presentation, they called Velkash to testify. He stood at the witness platform and looked out at the gallery. He saw Jiwoo sitting with her grandfather. He saw Dr. Linsha. He saw dozens of veterans from the memorial ceremony, both Talveen and from other species. And he saw humans, many humans, sitting together in a section of the gallery watching him with expressions of support. His attorney asked him to explain why he had released the classified documents. Velkash took a deep breath and began to speak. I served my empire faithfully for many years, he said. I followed orders without question, because I trusted that my leaders had the empire's best interests at heart. But after meeting with human veterans and hearing their perspective, I realized that something was fundamentally wrong with the narrative we had been given. He described his investigation, walking the court through each document he had found. He explained the automated threat assessment system and its flaws. He detailed Admiral Kathran's decision to bypass first contact protocols. He presented evidence that the military high command had known the intelligence was incomplete, but had chosen to act anyway. I broke the law, Velkash said simply. I do not deny that. But the law was protecting a lie, and that lie cost millions of lives across multiple species. If exposing that truth makes me a traitor, then I accept that judgment. But I could not remain silent knowing what I know. The defense called multiple witnesses. Jiwoo testified about her documentary research and the human perspective on the war. Hyunwoo appeared via hologram, too frail to travel, and described the fear and desperation that had driven human forces to fight with such ferocity. Krentok, the Krill warrior, testified about facing humans in combat. We called them mad, he said. We said they did not value their own lives. But Commander Velkash helped me understand. They valued their lives so much that they were willing to sacrifice them for what mattered. That is not madness, that is love. Other Talavine officers testified, some supporting Velkash and others condemning him. Military analysts explained how the threat assessment system worked and acknowledged its limitations. Diplomatic experts discussed first contact protocols and how badly they had been violated in the human case. The trial lasted 3 weeks. By the end, the evidence was overwhelming. The war had been started based on incomplete intelligence, personal ambition, and institutional failure. The Talavine government had known this and had covered it up for decades. The judges deliberated for 2 days. When they returned to deliver their verdict, the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Velkash stood to hear the judgment. The lead judge, an ex-Ali with pale blue wings, spoke clearly into the recording devices. "Commander Velkash, you have been charged with treason, espionage, and releasing classified information. After reviewing the evidence and hearing testimony from numerous witnesses, this court has reached a verdict." Velkash felt his heart pounding. He forced himself to remain still. "On the charge of releasing classified information, we find you guilty. You did violate military law by sharing documents you were not authorized to release. However, the court recognizes that these documents revealed illegal actions by military leadership and government officials. The classification of these documents served to hide criminal behavior, not to protect legitimate security interests." The judge paused, letting the words sink in. "On the charges of treason and espionage, we find you not guilty. Your actions were not intended to harm the Talavine Empire or aid its enemies. Your actions were intended to reveal truth and promote accountability. This court cannot punish truth-telling even when it is uncomfortable." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The judge raised a hand for silence. "This court orders your immediate release. Furthermore, we recommend that the Galactic Council establish a formal investigation into the origins of the human contact war and implement new regulations for first contact protocols across all member species. What happened to humanity must never happen again." The courtroom erupted in noise. Some people cheered. Others shouted in anger. Security moved to restore order while Velkash simply stood there, unable to process what had just happened. He was free. His attorney clasped his shoulder. "You did it, Commander." But Velkash barely heard her. He was looking at the gallery where Yunwu's hologram was flickering. The old soldier raised his hand in a salute. Velkash returned it, and for the first time in 30 years he felt something close to peace. The weeks following the trial were chaotic. The Talavine government was forced to issue formal apologies to humanity and pay reparations to families affected by the war. Several high-ranking officials resigned or were removed from office. The automated threat assessment system was completely overhauled, with new requirements for diplomatic contact before any military action. The Galactic Council passed new regulations known as the Velkash Protocols, establishing strict requirements for first contact with new species and creating oversight committees to review threat assessments. Multiple species began reviewing their own first contact procedures and admitting to mistakes they had made. But for Velkash personally, the most important change came from a simple conversation with Jiwoo and Hyunwoo. They met at the same garden where he had first spoken with the old soldier. "What will you do now?" Jiwoo asked. Velkash had thought about this question constantly since his release. "I do not know. I cannot return to military service. I have no other skills." "You have the most important skill," Hyunwoo said quietly. "You can tell the truth, and you can help others understand it." That conversation led to the creation of the Cross-Species Understanding Initiative. Velkash, Jiwoo, and Hyunwoo founded the organization together, with support from veterans across multiple species. The goal was simple: prevent future conflicts through education, dialogue, and honest examination of past mistakes. Velkash traveled to universities and military academies, giving lectures about the war and the importance of questioning authority. He spoke about the danger of dehumanizing other species, about how easy it was to turn people into enemies when you refused to see them as people. His most popular lecture was titled, "The Terror of Human Love." In it, he described his experiences facing humans in combat and his slow realization that their violence had been driven by desperation and love, not inherent savagery. "I was shattered by human violence," he would say at the end of each lecture, "because I could not comprehend human love. Love so fierce it would burn the galaxy to protect what matters. I called it madness. I called it violence. But it was neither. It was simply a species fighting for survival with every tool they had, and we drove them to it. Years passed. The initiative grew, opening chapters on dozens of worlds. Velkash continued his work, though the nightmares never fully left him. He still saw Taeyang's face. He still heard Sojin's voice saying, "You will have to kill me first." But now those memories carried a different weight. They were reminders of why his work mattered. 10 years after the trial, the initiative organized a memorial ceremony at Rigel Station. The station had been rebuilt as a joint human-Talvine research facility, a symbol of cooperation replacing the site of terrible violence. Velkash stood at the memorial wall where names of the dead were carved into stone. Thousands of names, human and Talvine side by side. He found Taeyang's name and placed a flower beneath it. Then he found Sojin's name and did the same. Jiwoo stood beside him, now middle-aged but still dedicated to the work they had started. Hyunwoo had passed away 2 years earlier, but his granddaughter carried on his legacy. "Do you think he would be proud?" Velkash asked, gesturing to where Hyunwoo's name appeared on a different memorial, one honoring survivors who had worked for peace. "I know he would be," Jiwoo said. "He told me before he died that meeting you was the moment he finally stopped having nightmares about the war. Because he realized that even his enemies had been victims." They stood in silence for a while, watching other visitors place flowers and say quiet prayers. Then a young Talvine cadet approached them nervously. "Excuse me, sir," the cadet said to Velkash. "I am studying the human contact war in school. I watched your lectures. I wanted to ask, why did humans fight so terribly?" Velkash looked at the young cadet, seeing himself decades ago. Young, certain, unquestioning, he knelt down to the cadet's level. "They fought terribly because they loved fiercely," he said gently. "We attacked them first. We gave them no choice but to fight or die, so they fought with everything they had,